had so many awkward moments doing public speaking. I should be in therapy. I mean, seriously. And the reason I say that is because when you watch somebody do a talk, usually from the outside you don't know that in the person's mind they're sort of screaming, "Oh no, not that," you know, because things are going on that they see from the front that are behind you. I remember one talk that I did that was supposed to be on the subject of marriage, and the only people who came to the event that night were a single father and his son. But I was on the hook, and I had to do the whole thing on a subject that had nothing to do, and that is much more typical of the Life of Giving talks than how it appears in the media. Probably the most awkward time I've ever had in one of these gigs is to speak at my own father's retirement. He was a pastor in the same church for 30 years, and as those days came to an end, the Sunday finally arrived, which would be the last one. And you know, that will happen for all of us. No matter what we do in life, there will be a day that is our last day doing that thing. That came from my dad. I had never seen anything like this before because I was still pretty young at that time. And so we all marched into this big dark auditorium that was majored on gloom. That looked like this set from a Dracula movie or something. My home church was so intensely intimidating. Lots of dark wood and high ceilings. You expected to see gargoyles hanging over like this. And we had a number of hymns that we all sang together to minor key organ music to keep it as sad as possible. And then there were several speeches by people I don't remember. And finally, it's my turn up at bat. So I'm wearing my blue suit and my yellow power tie from Maximum Mojo over these people. And so I walk up the curved stairs up into the elevated pulpit. Have you seen one of those? Old style, sort of European, kind of way up above you. That's to remind you that when someone is speaking from up there, they are speaking from a higher power to you who is lower. And so here I am, and I look out over the vast assemblage, which is about 40 senior citizens, all that's left from my dad's pastoral work with this congregation over 3 decades. Turn back the clock 3 decades to the 60s, there are multiple services, there are full parking lots, there are crowds, there's enthusiasm, there's excitement, and now here we are, so many weddings later that you couldn't count them, thousands of hospital visits, all that jello. And the last Sunday has come, and there's almost nobody left. So I'm looking down over, I feel like I'm with the buffalo on the Great Plains in the 1870s, and they're spiraling down to extinction. Most of these folks they're 100. It looks like they could drop over right on the spot, so I'm thinking, this better be brief. Let's get this going. And there's my high school debating coach seated with his wife right where they sat through my entire growing up life. There's the pew where my 5th grade English teacher and her husband sat, who ran the local drugstore. She was so mean in class. Now they're all dead. And there's the balcony where we used to play as kids during those interminable Sunday morning services. It's all empty now. There's no one up there. And I'm now looking down over the last few people that are still alive after those 30 years. All that input, and here's the output. A handful of elderly folks. All lovely people. And I'm thinking, they want me to give a feel-good talk in a moment where there's not very much to feel good about. And so because it's in church, I had 3 points. So long, so fast, and so what? And I don't think that talk did anything for anyone, because sometimes what you say is too small for the situation that you say it in. You know what I mean? Sometimes you're talking, but the situation is shouting. And what it's saying is, there's nobody here. Everybody's dead. You're preaching to 50 people, 40 people, and acres of dark wood, empty pews creaking as we shift our weight underneath us, counting the moments until this is all, oh, I felt heroic. When that was done, we all marched out. We went over to the multi-purpose room, which is what people in that denomination call the gym. And we did the ritual eating of potato salad and more Jell-O. Wrapped that all up, my dad and I walked into his office, and the phone rang. And it's a funeral director, and he is asking my father to add one to the tally of over 900 funerals that he had done in his career. Many for people who had no one to bury them because they had no connection to any faith tradition whatsoever. And my father, maybe for the first time in his life, said no to something. We went home, got up the next day, and here we are, day one of retirement. And the phone does not ring. And all the people who needed you, who hated you, who loved you, who were desperate for your attention and input, all those people who rang the phone off the hook all of those years have moved on to someone and something else, and your phone is now silent. You know, the great thing about a friendship with God through faith in his son Jesus is that you get to start over in life as many times as you need to. Isn't that good news? Isn't that a wonderful thing? I remember when I got a C in Spanish as an undergraduate, and I made the decision to start over by actually going to class. And this lifted my grade. If you offend or disappoint someone, with God's help, you can go back to that person and reconcile that and make that right and go on with things. That's called marriage. If you have a terrible moment of stumbling, if you fall flat on your face spiritually, if you do things that afterwards you just go, have you had this feeling that, that the cringe meter is off the scale, and you know that you have colored so far out of the lines that you're not even in the coloring book anymore, and you're here and God's like a million miles away. No matter how far away you are, you can always get a second chance in a friendship with God through faith in Jesus Christ. In fact, the Bible says that God's mercy toward us is new every single morning. That's in a book called Lamentations. Do you know what that means? It means you can't live enough days to outrun the mercy of God. If you live 10,000 days, his mercy will last 10,001. If you live 20,000 days, his mercy will last 20,001. If you live 1,000,000 days, his mercy will last 1,000,001. Maybe that's kind of what eternal life is. You live days without end, and he still has one more day of mercy on the far end that you'll never get past. Oh man, I'm glad for that. So we get to start over as often as we want, but you know, what my dad's experience taught me was this: you get to start over as many times as you need to, but you only get to end once. Let me say that again. You can start over as many times as you need to, but you only get to end once. How are you going to end? Now, I don't mean how are you going to die. Have you seen the show 1,000 Ways to Die? Yeah. Spike TV? Yeah, quit watching that kind of stuff. You know, the other day I was thinking about this, and I discovered that there is an If I Die app on Facebook. Do you have that yet? Yeah, if 3 friends certify that you've actually kicked the bucket, you can have your last status update on the Facebook servers to be launched out to the world once your friends, your trustees, all agree that you're actually dead, so that you can send the whole world. Doesn't the world need another message? Communicating from the grave, you're able to give one last report on what you had for lunch the last time around. Oh, the bologna sandwich was wonderful. And you send that out to the world, but you're dead, friend. Don't get this app. Please don't. People are thinking about, though, this idea of ending, or that kind of an app wouldn't exist. I went on deathclock.com, and I discovered just a short while ago that I'm going to die on July the 2nd, 2041. At least that's what this website says when I enter my height, my weight, my sex, male, which is, that's the end right there. My body mass index, you put all that in, click death clock, and bam, they give you the exact date, July 2nd, 2041. I can put it in my phone and plan my Facebook final status update using that date. Now, I have just under 1 billion seconds left to live. And now one less, and one less, and one less. I'm burning up my whole life with you people. My goodness, one less, one less, one less. The question of how I'm going to die isn't the same as the question of how I'm going to end, because the question of how I'm going to die is a biological issue. It's just the cessation of metabolic life in my cells and my brain stops functioning. The question of how I'm going to end is more about what does all that kind of mean? You know, that's a bigger question than just what should be on my bucket list, what should be my final to-do list. That's a bigger question than how can I extend my lifespan. It's the question of what's this all really been about anyway. Maybe a reasonable way to approach that question of endings and second chances is by comparing a couple of people who had two different landing zones, two men that we know from the Bible. One of them is named Judas Iscariot, and the other one is named Peter. And they both had a great deal in common. Both of them were part of the original group of 12 that Jesus called to be his first really close group of followers. We call those people the disciples these days. They both traveled for 3 years, walking the roads and villages of Palestine in first century times under Roman occupation. They both heard everything that Jesus taught. They heard him say, "Blessed are the meek." They heard him rebuke the religious authorities as whitewashed tombs and worse. They saw enormous miracles. They saw dead people raised. They saw lepers cleansed, blind eyes opened. They saw Jesus feed thousands of people out of just really little fragments of food. They both saw all of that, and they were both with him right to the end, and they both betrayed him, and they both died by violence. Now, we don't know very much about Judas Iscariot, really very little, other than he was part of that group of 12, and he was the treasurer of the group, and that he was a thief. In fact, one of the New Testament accounts tells us that one day when a woman named Mary tried to anoint Jesus with very expensive oils, kind of symbolically preparing him for death and burial, Judas, the thief, sometimes you can tell who's got the biggest problem by who complains the most. Judas, the thief, says, "We shouldn't be doing this. We could take all this expensive stuff and sell it and give the money to the poor." But the gospel writer points out that the reason he was saying that was because he was stealing money all the time. Are you tracking with this? The Son of God is the victim of embezzlement every day for 3 years. Now, where is this guy, Judas? Where is this guy's head? He is stealing from the Messiah every day for 3 years. And the reason he wanted this stuff sold to distribute to the poor, because that would fall to him, and then he could then skim a percentage off the top probably, which was the common custom in his situation, in his day, and well, gee, in our situation today in a lot of ways as well. And this would then enrich him and deprive the poor and the other people in the group of 12 along the way. He's not a good man. He stays with Jesus through it all. He sees everything that Peter sees, all the miracles, all the healings, everything that goes with all of that. And at some point, his heart becomes so twisted and so dark that the gospel writers record that Satan takes over that piece of territory in his soul. And now he's more twisted, darker. He's had enough. And as the end of Jesus' life approaches, and it becomes clear that a confrontation is about to develop, that a perfect storm of controversy with the religious, the political, and the military authorities are all adding up and all pointing Jesus to death on the cross, Judas goes to those religious authorities and maybe feeling the need to bail out before the whole enterprise craters in an execution. He says to them that he's willing to strike a deal in which he will lead the temple police to an arrest of Jesus, identify him in a private place, because if it takes place in public, the religious authorities know there's going to be a riot, and if there's a riot, that brings the Roman army down on them, and that's really bad for everybody. So he's got to be arrested in a private place, that he will identify Jesus with a kiss. And in return, the authorities agree to give him 30 silver coins, in today's money about the cost of a decent used car. You have stolen on a regular basis from the Son of God, and now you have traded him in for a Civic. When the fateful night comes, Jesus has met with all of his followers for one last time in the setting that Da Vinci made famous in his painting, The Last Supper. It's a Passover meal. The Lord washes the feet of all 12, shows himself to be the servant, not the one coming demanding, but the one coming and offering his own life. He washes Judas' feet in that process. When that's done and they're involved in the meal, Jesus says to all of them that the person who is going to betray him is there at the table. It's like one of those old-fashioned murder mystery movies where in the last scene the lead detective says, and the person who's guilty is in this room. It's just exactly that, almost movie-esque kind of a scene. And the 12 go crazy. They're what? One of us is? How could that be? Is it him? He looks guilty. I've always wondered about that guy. Who is involved here? And Judas speaks up and says, Lord, is it me? And Jesus says, the person that I take bread and dip it and hand that bread to, that's the one. And he takes that piece of bread, dips it, and hands it to Judas and identifies him as the one who will betray him and light the fuse on the huge explosion that will take him to the cross. And the last words they say to each other are Jesus saying to Judas, what you've got to do, go and do it quickly. And the gospel writer records that Judas went out, and then he puts the chilling words, and it was night. And it was. It was night in that man's soul, as well as night for everyone in that room. After they sing a hymn, Jesus and his followers go to a garden outside the walls of the city to have a time of prayer together, and in the quiet, they hear a group of people coming. It sounds like a mob. They're carrying torches. It's Judas leading the temple police. He walks up to Jesus, and the Lord says, are you going to betray me, or will you betray me with a kiss? Judas kisses him, identifies him as Jesus of Nazareth, the political revolutionary, the threat to Roman power, the one that all the religious authorities envied. The police arrest him, Judas standing there like some confidential informant in a low-level narcotics bust. And off Jesus goes to a sequence of interrogations, beatings, and illegal trials that would ultimately result in his execution at the cross. When Judas realizes what's really going to happen, Matthew, another member of the original 12, records in the 27th chapter of his account of Jesus' life what took place, beginning at verse 3. Then when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. They said, what is that to us? See to that yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and went out and hanged himself. The price of a used car wasn't enough to finance the remorse the grief, the pain, the anguish that he carried in his soul. The religious authorities cared not even a little bit. Their answer simply, that's on you. Peter was a part of that original group of 12 as well. He was a stinky fisherman, recruited by Jesus right from the shores of the Sea of Galilee. He said, "Follow me," from fishing to becoming a fisher of men, and he joined in. He was kind of you get the sense when you read the accounts of his life that he never met a conversation he didn't want to be part of, that he had the gift of, do you know anybody with the gift of blurting? You know, everybody talks, but some people know how to blurt. And so whenever anything would happen, you get the feeling when you read the Bible about his life that he would just say stuff, you know, because he was one of those, shoot first and aim later kind of a guy. And sometimes this helped him, and sometimes this kind of hurt him. One day when the disciples were in a boat on this same Sea of Galilee in the northern part of Palestine, and there was a huge storm, Jesus wasn't with them. They were all terrified. Where's the Lord? And they see Jesus coming and walking towards them on this storm-tossed sea. They don't really know who it is because the superstitions of the day could give a lot of different interpretations. And when you're terrified, it's really tough to know what you're thinking. And so Peter starts blurting, which is his default position on almost everything. And says, Lord, if that's you, you tell me to get out of the boat. Now, who comes up with an idea like that? You're in a storm, the boat is sinking, and you're suggesting, oh, Jesus, please drown me. Ask me to get out of the boat, which is our only source of safety. And so Jesus gives the instruction for that to take place. Peter jumps out, and all of a sudden, blurting is discovered to have no buoyancy whatsoever. And he begins to sink, and the Lord finds him and elevates him, and he pulls them all together and says, what's happened here is basically you don't have enough faith. Let's try to have some faith together. In another moment, Jesus seated with Peter and some of the others asked him, who do people say that I am? And they start sharing different ideas. Well, some people say you're Elijah, and some people say you're John the Baptist, and you've come back from the dead since the authorities beheaded you. And some people say this and that. And Jesus presses him and says, but who do you say that I am? And he replies, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus looks at this man and says, on this rock I'm going to build my church. Now, with all of that in his background, it's no surprise that when Jesus announces that his teaching career is going to end in an execution, that Peter goes right to the blurt play and says, Lord, no matter who deserts you, I will never leave you. I'm going to be with you to the bitter. Can't you tell it's not going to turn out already, just by the way he words it? I'm going to be with you to the bitter end. Have you ever made a promise like this? Oh, there's no way I'm backing up on this one. I'm totally down with this. If everybody else leaves, I will stay. If you have to go to your death, I will go to your death with you, and I will die. We will die side by side. I give you my word. Later, Jesus would tell him, before the cock crows, in other words, before sunup, you're going to deny me how many times? 3. After his arrest, triggered by the kiss of betrayal that Judas had given him, Peter followed along behind the temple police who were leading Jesus towards the end of his life. And when he's brought into one of the facilities where the authorities were meeting to begin his bogus trials, the Bible records that Peter came in with the crowd and he actually sat among the guards. And somebody recognized him. Weren't you part of his fan base? Weren't you with Jesus? He said, no, I've never heard of him. I'm just here for the party. I don't know what's going on. I do not know this man. And then someone else, a servant girl, says, I'm sure I saw you with him. I know that. I know that. But she was Peter is now louder. He's beyond blurting. He's no. I have nothing to do with this man. I have no. And another, but your accent it's Galilean. I saw you. I know what I saw with my own two eyes. And with a great vehemence, he says, absolutely not. Uses a lot of language that probably the guards weren't offended by at this point, and says, I've got nothing to do with this person. Absolutely never seen him before in my life. And the biblical writers record, the cock crows. Peter hears that. It's sunup, in other words. He's overwhelmed by remorse. And the phrase that's used is, he weeps bitterly. Jesus dies for the sins of the world on the cross. There's confusion afterwards about what happened. There are reports about the tomb being empty. Some say this, some say that. There are stories of angels and Roman soldiers and so forth, and they're still trying to sort all of that out. And so he goes back to his default position and blurts out, I'm going to go fishing. In other words, let's go back to our old life. We're going to return to square one. We tried the religion business for a while, and it was okay as long as Jesus was here. We had this direction, we had this great leader. He's gone now. We're still trying to figure out what is the status of things. Until we really know, until the dust settles, I'm going fishing. And they all go back with him. They're returning to their previous life. And so they go back to the Sea of Galilee, and they're fishing all night, which is done by throwing huge nets over the side of wooden boats in shallow water, essentially, usually pretty close to shore. And as they are involved in this fishing process, John, who is with them at that Last Supper event, who is one of the original 12, who is maybe the closest to Jesus as a person, writes an account of what happens in the 21st chapter of the book that has his name. Beginning in verse 4, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. Now they probably are suspicious at this point because he had said something like that once before to them, and this is almost an echo of a previous conversation. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, the author of these words, said to Peter, it is the Lord. Those are the four words that change everything. It is the Lord. It's not a tourist. It's not another fisherman. It's not a family friend. It is the Lord. The person we're looking at, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. Now, he is not trying to drown himself, to commit suicide like Judas is. He can't wait for the boat to get back to the shore because he recognizes who it is. It is the Lord. He throws himself into the sea and starts swimming like a madman toward the shore while everybody else is steering the boat back there because it is the Lord. Jesus pulls them all together on the shore over an open fire. He takes some of their fish and he makes them breakfast. He grills fish for them for breakfast. The people whose feet he had washed, the people who had watched him work these miracles, the people who had, by the way, all deserted him during his crisis of the cross, at least by and large, they're all back together, and instead of raining down fire and brimstone, he makes food. He takes Peter aside for a private conversation. It's very simple, and it goes like this. Do you love me? Lord, you know I do. Feed my sheep. Do you really love me? Lord, you know I do. Well, then, tend my lambs. Do you really, really love me? Lord, of course I love you. Then take care of my sheep. And with one statement of restored relationship for each word of betrayal, Jesus concludes that conversation with two words, the same two words that their relationship began with. Follow me. And then tells Peter, you know, you're used to going where you want to go, but a day is going to come when you're going to be bound up and taken somewhere you don't want to go. And John points out that in this phrase, Jesus is showing Peter how he's going to die. Two men, both disciples, both witness all the miracles, both betrayers, both die by violence. The difference between them is very simple. Judas, when he realized he was wrong and had his opportunity for a second chance, took matters into his own hands and went back to the authorities and tried to work it out on his own. And dies a suicide. Peter, when he sees his opportunity for a second chance, throws himself over the side and dives into the grace and love of God, goes back to Jesus, and lets Jesus work it out for him. How we end will depend on what we do with our second chances. My dad's church got a second chance. They had an opportunity to either relocate or reimagine the mission of their congregation. They chose not to. They chose to stay in place and build an education facility almost the size of a city block, and it became their tombstone. Today, that place is closed and the telephone number has been turned off. Because when the opportunity came to go back to Jesus, they tried to work it out on their own. Two men, both betrayers, both died by violence. Two men die, but one man lives. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads with me for just a moment, if you would. Our band's going to come and lead us in some worship this morning, and as they do, there's just a wonderful opportunity here today if you're in a position of needing a second chance. This is just going to be between you and God. We're not going to, single you out in any way, but if there's some aspect of your life where you just need another trip to the plate, and today the choice is, do I work it out myself, or do I go back to Jesus and say, Lord, I can't work this out. I need you to reach out to me. I need you to restore this relationship with me. I need you to come into my life and just do something. I'll swim to you, but you got to take it from there. I'll throw myself out of the boat, but Lord, you got to take it from there. I'll come to you and I'll answer anything that you have to ask me, but you just got to take it from there, because I don't have anything else to give you but just surrender. If you need a second chance today, if you need another chance at things, just before we begin to work,